Welcome to the Rise to the Challenge podcast. Joined today, he's a small business owner, entrepreneur, and advocate. It's Tyler Howell. How are you doing today, Tyler?
I'm doing great, Alex. Appreciate you having me on here. Thank
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
So I was, that's it's a complex story. Birthed by a 13-year-old, taken away when she was 17. And then, so I was 4, adopted at 6. And then, and then from that point on, I was in a stable household. And so that's where, that's a whole story. We'll keep it simple. So yeah, so my childhood, a big part of my childhood was, I don't know, learning to love, learning to be loved. Um, uh, you have to work with me on this one. I don't know what to say because it's complex.
You're good. With you being an adopted family, what's the biggest thing those parents taught you?
Well, I don't remember a lot of my earliest years, but my responses in my later years are pretty telltale of the beginning years. And it took me, being realistic, it took me until I was about 21 years old to fully accept that my parents loved me and had my back. And that took some trying, trivial times. And that was my first introduction, post addiction to the incarceral system. And so my childhood was a big tug of war emotionally, I would say. I mean, if for parents who adopt older children, there's a good probability you're going to have some behavioral problems. And so my childhood was a big test for my parents, who loved me and adopted me, knowing what I had been through. Founded in a LDS religious household. So there's a really strong emphasis on the family unit, which to this day, I know a lot of adopted adults whose parents abandoned them during those hardships, and those friction filled you know periods. And so I attribute the religious foundation to them sticking around through the hard times, the good times, the ugly times, all the times. And so it's a little hard to answer that question, because I don't remember too much, if that makes sense. So post early childhood, when you have certain traumas, you can have memory, like you block out memories.
Mhm.
So from about 8 and below, I have a really hard time remembering things, and especially 6 and below, I don't remember anything. And so, yeah.
You talked about with being adoptions, kids sometimes have behavioral changes. Did that play an effect with getting along with other kids as you gotten older? So 8 and older, did that play in an effect on how you got along with other kids?
Well, so I also moved around a lot when I was a kid. But then also when you're in the foster care, and then when you get moved from environment to environment to environment with different kinds of people as a child that you
Mhm.
have to please through behavior, I became really good at adapting. So I always fit in, but I wasn't necessarily loud. If that makes sense. So I actually got along pretty well with other kids because it's my natural tendency to, in an adaptive state like that, I do well with other people, if that makes sense. So I wasn't, it didn't interfere with, any of that kind of stuff.
I think that whole concept of adapting kind of goes now with the school way, where kids are finding that group that they kind of fit in with, but they have to adapt their kind of behaviors in each group to get along with everyone. And I feel like I did that where I just wanted to be friends with everyone. But even though if I didn't click with someone, I kind of were like, okay, how can I do that? But in your situation where you're moving around, it's a lot harder because you might be in an area that you might not know much about, and you're kind of having to rely on some sources to kind of figure that all out.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, pulling back from your memory, like what do you think are the key ingredients, or the key pieces of being able to do that.
I think you have to be true to yourself. Don't fake it to make it. I think that is where it gets harder because kids nowadays know a lot more than people think. And they are one of those things that they'll read people. They'll understand if you're not really being your true identity. And find those people, get to know those people because you might think, oh, I want to be in that group. But then after a while, you're going to figure it out that that's not for me and you have to go with what your gut feeling is.
Well, it's funny you say that because I remember in high school specifically being with like the cool kids.
Yep.
And then I remember removing myself and then I went into more like the skater group because I had what you just said. I realized that like there was much substance to this relationship and this dynamic. And I found that over here. So it's funny you mentioned that because I think that's probably an experience that a lot of us have had while we were in the school system.
With high school, you mentioned going from the cool kids to the skater kids. The activities those skater kids, were you into skateboarding, scootering, rollerblading? I don't know what they were doing, but were you into those types of activities?
No, I was in the activities. It was I say the personalities,
Okay.
the interactive style. Because when you go from certain groups of kids, everything is different. The behavior, the social culture, and that actually ended up leading me into. That's when I started smoking weed. I would drink some alcohol in the cafeteria with some other cool kid, other like we were cool kids, but like it was a different, yeah, so no, not skating, but maybe it was more the behaviors that I don't know if that makes sense. That's
Did
interesting
you
you bring that up.
did you kind of have that rebellious? Is this where the rebellious
Yeah,
side kind of started?
yeah, that's a good way to put it too. Yeah, so it fit in with the rebellious. Yeah.
Did you ever get afraid of getting caught smoking weed, alcohol in the cafeteria, things like that? If my school ever saw that, oh, people would get caught in a second. No, in my school growing up.
Well, no, because what we do is we mix it. So we mix it in like water bottles so
Oh
that it would
yeah.
have like colored juice to it and stuff. And so I can't remember all the specifics of it, but I know that we did that. And as a kid, when you get away with something, maybe even as an adult too, like you get that sense of satisfaction, that gratification from like getting over, being sneaky and whatnot. So it fed into that little psychological paradox too.
In high school, did you ever figure out what you wanted to do as a future? Sometimes we're asked that dream job of ours. Was that ever in a game plan for you?
I don't know. I can't recollect specifically. I didn't grow up with some sheer determination to be this or be that. I ended up going to a group home at 15. So I graduated, I did ninth, 10th, no, I did 10th, 11th, and 12th grade in 9 months through independent study in Clark County. My parents sent me away. And so I graduated high school at 16. So I only went up to ninth grade, but then I finished in a group home. So I was actually out of the group home so I had my high school diploma at 16 years old. So I was actually, yeah, so that's kind of part of that story too.
Did it feel unusual to get a high school diploma at 16 when normally people are getting them at 18, graduating high school and then on their way to college? 16, you're still young. I mean, that's the driver license age right there.
Well, yeah, it was different because I ended up getting a job and I was working while my friends were still going to school. So it was definitely different in that dynamic. So social life was a little bit different, but I was only out of that group home for 6 months. So I turned 17, and then no, I was out of it at 16 for 6 months. And my parents sent me back to the group home, and then I was there for another like 5 months, and then I came back for 4 months, and then my parents sent me off to Utah, and then at 17 I was on my own. So that's sorry, that was super confusing, but like, but so from I think there's a good way to explain it. So from the age of 15 to today, I've
Mhm.
only been free on the streets for like 6 year, 1, 2, plus now I've been out for 4 years. I was only out for like 6.5 years from
Wow.
15 all the way to now 7 years. So for seven, from 15 to 32, So for about a good majority of those, I was in group home or I was in incarceration facility.
So why did your parents keep sending you back? Was there like a specific reason? Like, was there a game for them to send you back? Were they hoping something would change or something different would result if you were coming back after the group home?
Well, a child like me um, is overwhelming,
Mhm.
especially from a family that never dealt with a child with traumas like I have had, and so um, without a doubt, my parents didn't know what to do. And I think that's a really important discussion for another day. Is what do parents do in these situations, especially when these children have like abandonment issues and these other things. So you are doing what you think is best for the child with while unknowingly agitating pre-existing traumas and like abandonment's a real thing. And so it exact it magnified the problem in a
Mhm.
sense instead of alleviated the problem. It didn't prevent it, excelled it. Um, if that makes sense. Because even at the group home, I remember specifically the moment we were learning about drugs, and I was only there for smoking weed and drinking alcohol. I'm learning about ecstasy. I'm learning about all these other pills. And actually, when I got out that first time, I actually went and tried ecstasy specifically because of what I had learned in the group home. So so I was a really troubled child and really hard to deal with. So it's like, what do you do in that case? You don't know what's going to work. So in your mind, you're like, send them off to the professionals. So
Looking,
I mean that's not the way I know how to answer that.
you're good. Looking at where you are today, looking at that time, do you kind of understand why they did that? Maybe at
Yeah.
the time you're like, why are they doing this? But as reflecting back, does it make a little bit more sense on why that decision was made to send you there?
See, and as I become more educated, so I'm a sociology major, and so I love human behavior, what makes people do the things that they do. And so the more educated I become, the more neutralized I become, if that makes sense, when I think back to that, because what do you really expect people to do and what would we do in that same
Mhm.
situation? Like, people have certain capacities for different things. So, like, as I've grown older, just like with my birth mom, I met my birth mom when I was 29. Up until that moment, so like I have Forsaken right here tattooed. And I really, for a good 28 years of my life, I felt abandoned and forsaken. When in reality, I found that God does work huge miracles, big miracles, and when you have big picture mentality, when you're in the small, you can't see the big picture. So I
Mhm.
didn't see how being taken away, how in the long run was going to actually provide ample opportunity. It was going to break generational cycles, and it was going to allow me to be in environments that can cultivate, I don't know how to say it, in a sense, like how cultivate I don't know, productively in a healthy manner. I don't know, because my birth mom lost her other three kids as well. So like, um, I mean, that's a hard one. It's like I'm super grateful, but in those moments, I felt hurt and I felt, abandoned. But now, fast forward again, I'm 32. I look back and I'm grateful. I have no regrets. Everything that happened has molded me to who I am today. And and along the journey, I made it really tough for a lot of people, including my parents. So I mean, I don't blame them. Like it's hard too, especially after forgiving my birth mom, but having to understand the story and put myself in her shoes. And especially as I got more details and you realize, like, what is a 13-year-old really gonna do?
Mhm.
Her birth mom abandons her because of the situation. And so it's like forgiveness has to be given. It's hard. But as I've gotten older, it's become way easier. And as I've become more removed from that life and from those experiences, and I add the education to it, I see, from a more mature and clear perspective.
I definitely think where you are today, you are definitely doing the right thing and reflecting. And because you brought up a great point where it's hard to say what if something happened because it didn't happen at that time. When you're living in that situation, you're thinking the worst of those situations, but you're taking what happened and you're bringing positives out of it, how you've learned from it. You've gotten to where you are today. You've gotten better. And that's where a lot of people have challenges now is they think, oh, I went through that path. It wasn't like how it should have been. I always say, if I didn't go through my challenges, I would not be where I am. If I didn't have a challenge, why would I be doing this show? There would be no point doing the show because I can connect with people on their challenges because I've gone through my challenges. And the challenges you face, you've learned so much. And that's important nowadays.
No, 100%. And, you know, as you've experienced in your life and I've experienced in mine, like for me to rise, I had to see other people rise and I had to hear
Yep.
about other people rise and I had to know that other people have risen. And then I can pull strength from that and I can pull perspective from that. I can pull, all sorts of inspiration from that. And so that's why what you're doing is so great because people need to be able to connect, like you said, because we all have an overlap when it comes to facing those challenges because I mean it takes the same pieces of us to overcome those just different kinds of challenges. So I'm glad you overcame yours, that's for sure.
You talked about at a young age getting into ecstasy. Was this the start of a different path that you are now taking, which would lead into a big part of your story?
So I wouldn't say it was big by any means because out of all the drugs I've done, that doesn't even it pales in comparison to
Mhm.
negative effects and long-term effects, cognitive effects. But that was the behavioral pattern that got me to where I'm at today. It was the seeking those things, rebelling. And then once I got those tastes and I had those, fun experiences, living in the moment. So definitely from a behavioral pattern perspective, 100% where it began. It actually began before that when I was seeking out the things that I knew I wasn't supposed to do but I just sought them out because I was told not to do them, and then
Mhm.
the path led.
Before going into jail or prison, did you ever have the moment where I need to kind of get away from this lifestyle? Like not be using drugs and things like that because it could end up somewhere bad.
That's a really good question. Um, I am sure in moments, yes, and especially when I got in trouble. But during those, relapses, during those, phases with different drugs and whatnot, um, I wouldn't say I was too the reality wasn't very clear to me of the
Mhm.
impact of my choices. I wasn't able to. I didn't have long term vision. I didn't have that ability. I would say because prefrontal cortex plays a huge role in my story, and that's logic and decision making. So up until the full cognitive development of my brain, most definitely.
Talk about the moment that you got arrested or went into prison. Talk
Well,
about
my
that journey.
Okay, well, my first arrest was my federal offense, and that was for guns. Um, what I had done is I had been doing burglaries. So one of my druggy friends had showed me how to first, number one, steal cars, and then how to break into houses. And so at that point, to feed my addiction, I ended up just doing burglaries and like breaking into cars and stuff and I ended up coming across a house that had a bunch of hunting guns, so hunting rifles, and then a handgun, and that's how my introduction started. I had absolutely no idea. This is the insanity of what I did. I didn't even realize that I was trying to get rid of guns. Like I didn't even realize like on the scale like this is not something you want to be involved in. It's like when you asked if I realized what I was doing when I was doing it and I wanted to escape it, I didn't even understand the world I was in. I was just oblivious. And so that's when that started. That was my wake up call. Like when I got arrested, I was crying. Like they had me freaked out. I literally someone else, like, I don't want to get into all this all the I don't want to make this about it, but I experienced the ultimate betrayal because the gun that I ended up pleading guilty to wasn't even in my possession. So that first encounter with the system was not just that I ended up with 5 felonies and then a federal indictment, but it was my first huge sting when it comes to betrayal and people and the world that those choices encapsulates you in.
How long, without going into the legal stuff, how long was that first sentence for you?
So I was locked up for a total of 17 months. And so, yeah, so a total of 17 months. And then I got out. So that's the answer to that question.
What was in those first 17 months? What was the hardest thing now getting into a new routine where you don't have freedom anymore? You are in control by the system.
Well, it was a huge wake up because before having been incarcerated, I had been in one fight in my entire life. And that literally involved me getting punched. So, like, I didn't have this violent physical altercation, streak. So,
Mhm.
being put into that world was a whole new world because you have to be able to stand up for yourself. And if you don't, then you're actually more likely to be involved in violence. And so it really turns everything that you knew in the real world upside down because you have to respond to things in different ways. But because of my childhood, I adapted really quick. But this is an embarrassing story. This is great. I hope people watch this. They can laugh at me. So when I first got locked up, well, it's happened one time, but this is the one time. This is something that shaped me. I ended up getting slapped, and basically, I checked myself out of a section, and that was right when I first got incarcerated. Like literally within the first like 45 days, like I've already experienced this, this different world, and that is what woke me up, and that is when my super adaptive state came into play, and that's when I really started doing the things that I needed to do to, number one, protect myself in the moment, but then to prevent future provocations. But then it changed my whole mindset. It woke me up like, hey, this is where you're at, Tyler. Like, you've got to get in line, if that makes sense. Like, so let's just say I was this suburban adopted kid, or the suburban kid, and then you get thrown into this lifestyle with a whole different crowd. If that makes sense. Like, I'm pretty sure I didn't grow up with too many. If that makes sense. Like, it's a different lifestyle.
We see a lot of times on TV shows and even like the crime and stuff kind of TV shows where a lot of these criminals come in with egos. They think they're the tough people on the streets. Not saying you are, but did you kind of see that mentality in a lot of the other inmates where they think that they're all that, but then they kind of get that wake up call like, I'm not that type of person. That is just a persona that I had on the outside world.
Well, and see, that brings up a really important piece of like what's wrong with our carceral system, because you even if, say, a person goes in there and they want to flip their ego upside down, the environment and the mentality that you're surrounded with is pretty toxic.
Mhm.
So that's not the narrative spoken. You know what I mean? So, like, yeah, people are in there incarcerated and they're changing their lives and they're doing a lot of things to better themselves. But like the default vibe, the default mentality is to embrace your past in a sense, and then leverage it in there in a sense. So yeah, like you can talk about people making up like, I was this big bad burglar, this big bad armed robber, or whatever it is. But a lot of people come in with like, street credibility and
Mhm.
street experience. And so when you have that in there, and this is their way of life, their way of being, in or out, it that's not that's not as natural as you would think it would be. I think that's the best way to put it.
I think it's great that you say that because for us, we've not been in the inside of a cell and we don't understand it. We're only getting a point of view from the outside. But for someone that's lived it, has been in there, and you see what goes on, I think it's important that that voice gets out there because we can understand as outsiders that we don't know everything that happens. We're only getting that one-sided argument in a way.
No, I mean, and that's awesome because I mean, that's just the importance of putting ourselves in other people's shoes when it comes to anything, especially when there's punitive put on it. I feel that there has to be, there's two sides to every story.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you.
We just talked about your journey and the challenges you faced being incarcerated, but what's the biggest thing in those first 17 months it taught you about yourself?
Um, well, the sad truth is, those first 17 months didn't send a clear message. And I'll direct, I mean, I can associate that to prefrontal cortex and cognitive development. I I mean, the truth is I didn't have any plan. I didn't have any destination, I didn't have any direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. It brought me closer to my family, to the sense that I know that they love me and care for me. So that when I was 21 years old, that was when I think that's when I was getting sentenced to federal prison. And so that's what came out of that was that realization. So that's something even to this day I remember. Um, and so I mean, out of all that, I think that would be the key nugget would be that piece. But that's I mean, I wish I could give this good answer because the change didn't come till later. You know what I mean? I was lost.
But that's you say like you wish you had that good answer, but sometimes it may not happen right at that time. And that's just the life's journey. And you realize those things maybe later down the road. After that first initial sentencing, what was next for you? Did you go out and try to start something new, or did you fall back into your old ways?
Well, after that, I was put into a intensive inpatient program,
Hmm.
and so at this point too is important. I was on dual probation, so I was on federal and state. So if you violate one, you violate the other, you get double the consequence. You might get them concurrent, but there's a good chance you get them consecutive, but it gives them that ability. So that was a whole trap in itself too. I was in this intensive. I was not in a mindset to be in such a structured environment where literally you're told everything you can and can't do, if that makes sense. So
Hmm.
going from a structured environment where you can't do anything you want, going to another one that you can't do anything that you want, in a sense, is how I viewed it in the moment. Um, it didn't work well for me. And if you fast forward to how I got sober and getting my life together, you can see why that didn't work for me because I ended up doing things, taking things in my own hands. If that makes sense. And so, the structured environment like that has just never. It brings out my rebellious self, and especially at that age, I lasted like 4 months. I got restarted from the program like 3 times. I ran, went and got high and came back. They still let me come back, and I still went back out. And then at that point, I'm on the needle. So now I'm shooting up drugs instead of just smoking the drugs. And so that's when it took a pivotal turn downwards for my use because from that point on, my relapses included IV meth use.
Did that ever lead to another sentence? Or was this
Oh
just
yeah,
it led to something else?
yeah, because it led to something else. And here's another thing too. It's important. So obviously, I'm not a very logical thinking, person, if that makes sense. And so in those moments, um, as soon as you know that you're going to go back for a violation and
Hmm.
you're getting high on drugs, at that point it becomes an all in, like an all or nothing mentality. So you're like, okay, well, I'm going back no matter what. Okay, I'm hopped up on drugs. I really don't want to go back. And so now it's you versus them. And so now
Hmm.
you're committing crime on a level that you never did before because now your paranoia is running rampant. Your habits are different, your lifestyle is different, you're on the move. You've got nothing to lose at that point. You're like, well, I'm going in anyways. And so that was part of my uh, illusioned ways of thinking. I don't know if it's the right word to use, but it was complete insanity. It makes no sense. But that was my thinking. That was my thinking. So as soon as I got high, I'm like, oh man, I'm going back. So then I start committing crime, and then I go back for a new charge. But it all started with the, oh crap, I'm going to go back for using. Then I went and committed crimes, and then I went back on the new charges.
Getting sentenced, did it ever help you get sober, or was there's too many temptations in a cell in the cells that you're just keep going, keep going, keep going, just trying to get through the day?
Well, it's important to know that people use drugs for a reason. And so there's a lot of traumas, there's a lot of things put on the shelf, to collect dust, hidden away in the dark crevices of your mind.
Hmm.
Punitive punishment does not alleviate or remedy any pre-existing psychological, mental conditions or traumas. In many cases, it will agitate it. So, like when I went to prison, I did 1 year in 23-hour day lockdown, next year in 21-hour day lockdown, and so people have it way worse than that, by the way. But what I was getting at is the form of punishment doesn't it doesn't fix any of the causes of the behavior. So why are you using? What's causing you to use? Like, what is it? What are your like what's causing your demons? And you'd be surprised how many incarcerated individuals are former foster youth, for example. You know what I mean? And how many addicts are from broken homes, didn't have fathers, et cetera, et cetera. So when you get in there, you see this overlying pattern of traumas and life experiences, lack of structure, lack of guidance that's not being remedied. So you're not giving them the tools that they didn't have before when they got out. So they get out in the same version of themselves as before, and they go back to old people, places, and things. So and then when they get released and you can't get housing and employment, well now you're even more pressure to go back to old people, places, and things just to survive. So there's a whole spiel around that.
In that next go around, getting into those final days before going back out to the world or the civilian life, did you have a game plan this time? Did you kind of think,
Um,
I need to get sober? I've got to get on the right track for myself, for my family.
Well, so is this then, or is this my last sentence?
Last sentence.
So my last sentence was 3.5 years. So when I was about 27 years old, something changed, and I I believe that that's my prefrontal cortex, because that's about the time in a male when it develops, and I started to see things differently.
Mhm.
I started to be able to play the tape through. I started to be able to see the long term effects of current decisions. I started to be able to formulate a far broader picture of the world, if that makes sense, that I before couldn't. And so when I got out, it wasn't, didn't have a plan, but I had a will, if that makes sense. And that 3.5 years, it it put a fire in me, is the best way to put it. Um, because at that point, after so many years and seeing so many things and experiencing, getting sent back for not having an address, now I'm being locked up just because I didn't have an address. Um, the accumulation of those things built a distaste in my mouth for the system. I didn't want to be a part of it. But then I also, part of my purpose building from that is, okay, how can I help change it?
Mhm.
How can I use my voice? How can I take action and work to impact, justice impacted, people who are in my shoes? How do we give voice to the people who are incarcerated who don't get to tell their voice because the voices that are heard are so loud that they totally suppress those voices that actually need to be heard. If that makes sense. We talked about needing to see both sides of the story. So, I mean, there were relapses over those past 4 years. But I mean, there's a whole story behind how I got sober. And that's when it changed. And that was when I was almost 29. And I got in contact with my birth mom again. So, to get sober one night, I just up and left and used these little crowdsourcing apps like Easy Shift, Observa Now, Mobi, and some other ones. And I hop Walmart to Walmart And that's how I got across country. And I went over to my birth mom's, and that's when my life really changed, because that's when this Forsaken got turned more into seeing that I'm blessed. And so from that point on, my perspective, and the things that I had internalized and the experiences that I had internalized, began to become untangled, and that foggy, misinformed, younger, unable to analyze and assess the world around me, is able to dip back into there and start unweaving, those feelings of abandonment, and I started to see life from a more blessed perspective versus, abandoned, forsaken, lost, didn't matter. You know, grew up my whole life saying, oh, if I saw my birth mom, I'd run her over once, turn around, run her over again. Now I see her for her story. She's a victim. And so through that, I've been able to forgive her, but then also be grateful to have been taken away from her at the same time for my own sake. And so that was a whole journey in itself. And so, I mean, it took years. It took years after getting out to finally get to that point to where I left, met her, got into college. It's crazy. So it's a neat story. And then that leads me to today. But it all started with my trauma. My number one trauma was abandonment. So meeting my birth mom was the pivotal piece in healing my younger internal self. And it's just it's a god it's a god thing without a doubt, because without that I couldn't even be where I'm at.
When in that time that you've gotten to know your birth mom, what is the number one thing that it's you've learned from that experience? From learning that she's not come back to wanting to get to know you, to how you take that into your life when you're meeting other people. Is there something that you utilize there that you utilize with other people in your life?
um well, I mean, I think the number one key takeaway from that is just the power of childhood experiences.
Mhm.
So I mean, I don't know how to answer your question other than I have an insight through my own experiences for other former foster youth, and for people who maybe were from broken homes, and maybe there's some piece of that they hold on to that is, feeding a demon inside of them, low self-worth, et cetera, et cetera. So out of all of that, uh, I don't know how to answer your question other than, our childhood has there's a lot of answers in our childhood, that for every person is different. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of power in revisiting and healing those experiences. I mean, that's just for me. It doesn't really. I don't know if that applies for everybody, but
No, you answered that because a lot of people, when you get to know them, especially with people in relationships and stuff, there might be something from their childhood that's why they do something. Hey, they act a certain way, they think a certain way, and we're able to understand and learn more about that. So for me, not knowing who you were until just now, I'm learning how you do certain things based on your experiences, and I'm learning and looking at it from a different lens where we're not here to judge, we're here to learn, because there's something valuable that you've taken from it that we could all utilize in our lives, and that is important because we haven't experienced that from where you've come from.
well, yeah. And I want to add, like, one of the reasons that I don't have any regrets about being an addict is because the only way through is inside. So you have to fix your internals, and you have to put a lot of work into yourself.
Yep.
Um, it 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 gives you, a survival instinct need to do that, which when you go beyond addiction, it is a tool in a sense, because you are already familiar with transparency of self and acknowledging the ugliest truths of yourself, and then being willing to face those, because if you don't, you could literally die.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the best things about being a healed addict is, first of all, the fire from my experiences, but then number two is how it forces you to become a better you
Yep.
constantly. which once you break through that, like, I mean, we can take that as far as we want to, if that makes sense, because we're our own worst enemies, we're our greatest obstacles. Everything we want is on the other side of fear. So the more we learn of ourselves and then how we work and then how to make those changes, the more potential that we have. So like there's a lot of power in having been an addict that I mean, so there's gratitude in our trials and our struggles, you know what I mean? So it's hard to see that, but in hindsight, it's a little bit easier.
Our listeners love to learn more about the individual. After they hear their story, they want to learn even more about our guests. For all of our audio listeners, you're probably not seeing what Tyler looks like right now, but his look is very creative and artistic with all the tattoos. And I'm fascinated to learn, how did you come up with the tattoo art that you wear?
Well, I have there's a lot of different things on me. I have reminders. Um, I have, commemorative pieces. So like my grandpa, who played a pivotal role in my childhood, left an impact. Um, and so I have reminders. So I'll just share this right here. This helped keep me sober. It's funny because it worked. But I have, so my mom, Allie, and then my dad and my sisters, they're all on the inside of my fingers. But the reason that they're in the inside of my fingers is because if I shoot up a needle, then I have to see their names. And
Wow.
so this, I have different things like that on me, but I did put my mom because she's the thumb and the hand is useless without the thumb, and my mom is the glue and the rock of our family. And so this right here specifically, because I had relapses after where I was using needles. And so I had to see that. And so it's interesting how that actually played a role in reminding me of things outside of myself, because even today, it's the things outside of myself that keep me going. Those are the things that give me fire. Those are the things, that give me fuel and ignite my passion.
I love how
But
you
I have a
mentioned.
lot. My back's tattooed, my head's tattooed, my legs are tattooed, my stomach, my chest, my foot. I mean, I have a lot of tattoos. 23-hour day lockdown for a year, and then I mean, what else are you gonna do? And there's people that are back there for. There's people back there literally. They come out every 72 hours for 45 minutes, and they're by themselves in cells for years. And so, I mean, well, what else do you do?
What age were you getting your first tattoo?
My first tattoo, I think I was 17. It was, yeah,
Okay.
17 when I moved out to Utah on my own. Yeah, 17.
What was that first tattoo you got?
It's embarrassing, but I'll show you. It's this. I was into Cottonmouth Kings. So it was a king spade. So it was like a little fad, easily influenced kid putting some garbage on me, but it's part of my story.
But like you said, a lot of times you hear, I love the stories where tattoos have a meaning. I have one on my back, and I would not put anything on me if it didn't have a meaning. And I love the story about the fingers with the names of your family members, because it played such a big role for you. And you look at it even every day as you're being sober, where you see that your family is always with you no matter what, because it's on your fingers. You're always seeing it. Anything you're doing, you're always being reminded that your family is always with you. And I love hearing that.
Yeah, I know 100%. And the crazy thing too is like, who are the people that you can be in not conflict, but you can be in disagreement with, but you're still going to congregate together, break bread together, and you're going to have your different views, but you'll still come together. You
Yep.
know what I mean? You'll still be there for each other, and you don't get the same thing in general with friends and other people, but family. That's why I'm grateful that I was adopted by my family, because their strong family values have been a glue and a support, regardless of how I feel in the moment. Like I mean, God's greatest gift, family.
Are you currently in Utah?
I'm actually visiting my sister, so that's why I got this beautiful princess bed behind me. It's my niece. So I'm in Arizona right now, visiting with family over the new year. And so yeah, Utah is where I'm at.
What's the biggest thing you love doing in Utah? People hear about certain aspects of Utah, snow, religion, things like that. But what do you like to do in Utah that maybe some people don't know about?
Well, That's a great question. I'm not much of the tourist. Uh, I mean, that's a I can't really answer that question. I haven't really. Someone brought this to my attention recently too. I don't. I've been because of my life choices and the lifestyles I was living, and then the consequences following, especially societal wise. I haven't really gotten out there much.
Mhm,
It's not in my schema of things to do, if that makes sense. And like right now, I'm in college. I'm trying to get this marketing business off the ground, and I'm trying to get involved in creating reentry programs for justice impacted Americans. And so, like in my mind, it's hard to have fun. Like you're asking for a question because I've already had fun doing all the dumb stuff. So it's like
mhm.
but the skiing 100%, we're known for our skiing. Great slopes, great mountains, great powder. So that's what we're best known for. I've gone. So skiing, I would say, but I don't have the most fluffed up answer for that.
I just remember I almost got a job in Utah for a football team that doesn't even exist anymore, but it was like the minor leagues for the NFL. And I almost got a job for that team, but then the team went out of business right before my last interview. And I'm like, man, what would have happened if I moved to Utah? Like, I would probably start enjoying the outdoors even more because, like, you talk about skiing. I wish I could do that a lot more now. I'm in Missouri, and so it's a hit or miss with weather. You're in Arizona where it doesn't even snow. So I always wonder, like, where would my life be if certain things happened? But like we talked about earlier, everything happens for a reason, and we take those experiences, take those challenges we face, and we take those to the extreme and go all out with everything.
No, 100%. And I'm sure you're happy with your trajectory right now based on your experiences, because what would you have done without a job in Utah?
Exactly. I mean, I was in for jobs that I was so away from family. It was so hard because I'm like, well, I would have to take a plane ride to get home, where now I'm only an hour away. And being in Utah, I would be hours away. And it would be tough because I'm a family guy. That's for me. I love my family and I like having those weekends with them, weekday dinners and things like that.
No, that's awesome. You got a big family?
No, I'm an only child. And so I have my mom and my dad, and that's about it, and the grandparents. So that's about it. But I take every time, every second I spend with them and enjoy it because you never know what can happen.
Well, question, are you going to create your own family?
I hope so. I hope so. If my girlfriend's listening to this interview, she'll probably hear it now, but hopefully. That's so long into the distance that I haven't even thought about. I'm just enjoying life. I feel that I'm at a space where it's meant to be like excited about what's next. New year, except it doesn't feel like it's a new year. It's just another day, but just enjoy every opportunity we have.
No, 100%, 1000%. And I think our obstacles and our trials will definitely help us formulate of what's most important to us. It's where we find out our truths, what really matters, what really impacts us, what's long lasting and what's short lasting.
Exactly. Do you have anything on a bucket list? Something that you want to personally accomplish in the next few years?
Well, when you said bucket list, first thing was skydiving. But then
Oh,
when you said the next couple of years, that'd be my business goals with my agency. And then I want to start getting books written. I want to write some motivational books. And so, I mean, plenty of things. I want to get into the reentry program creation because I feel that my experiences, especially accumulated with some other diverse experiences of overcoming institutionalization and addiction, um,
mhm.
I think that there's a lot of value in those, and it needs to be formulated and put in front of the right people that it would work for. So that's something I want to get involved in. So I guess my goals are just to continue with what I'm doing and position myself to create a positive impact instead of just worrying about getting myself to be okay, if that makes sense. So my goal is to get me right, so then I can start getting other people right. So that's my next, 2 years in a nutshell.
The final question I'll ask you, for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
Embrace failure. Failure is an indicator, it is a signal, and it is a compass. Don't let failures, which aren't even really failures, but don't let moments that feel like failure prevent you from continuing on, because you never really know how far away you are from where you're trying to go, what you're trying to do. And we learn a lot about ourselves through trial and error, which is, incremental failures throughout the journey. So just like recently with my marketing, crashed it, did it all wrong. I've never done a business before, but through that, I've gained far better perspective, figured out where my weaknesses are, what I need to tend to. And so if we just take that to our life, I mean, if our relationships aren't going right, we'll look internal. You know what I mean? Like if things aren't going right, I mean, there's just flags abound around failures and trivial moments, and just tons of signals, tons of signals. We just have to look and be willing to see ourselves as imperfect.
Well, Tyler, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we're excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thanks, Alex, for reals. I appreciate that and everything you're doing. It's awesome.